So moving on, now I'm actually going to get into the meat of this tutorial, which is how to use the edit poly functions as they pertain to modeling. So first thing I'm going to do, to convert an object to an editable poly, you need to right click on the object, and you'll have a whole bunch of options here. Actually, I'll show you a few of these in a second because they can tend to be useful as well. But you right click on the object, and at the very bottom here it says convert to editable mesh, editable poly, editable patch, or convert to NURBS. I usually just go with editable poly. There are some instances where you would like to use an editable mesh, but rarely. Most of the time I say convert to editable poly, and all of the time when dealing with polygonal modeling. So convert to editable poly. And before I get too far ahead of myself, I'm just going to show you some of these other things here that I use. A lot of these are repeats of things that you can find elsewhere, so I won't talk about those too much, but I'm just going to show you a few of the important options. One of them is object properties, and under here you can define a lot of various different properties. You can choose to make the object see-through if you want. You can just display it as a box if you have too many objects in your scene and you want to make your viewport rendering speed up again. Backface culling is kind of useful and fairly important sometimes, so I tend to use that a lot. And trajectory is something used for animation. Probably the rest of these I won't talk about too much for the purposes of this tutorial, but basically backface cull is the most important one under here. What that does, I'll show you really quickly, is it makes the backs of faces see-through, so it doesn't draw the backs of faces. And that can be very useful at times. I usually tend to leave it on, but if you turn it off, then you will get the renderer rendering the back polygons as well, and it just renders them as black. But I tend not to really like to leave that on. So I'm just going to undo this here, and then go back to object properties, backface cull. Now, back to the edit poly. So we took this object and we turned it into an editable poly. So if we go over to the Modify tab now, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of options that just opened up to my right here. These are the edit poly options, and these are where polygonal modeling really comes into play. So first at the top, I'm just going to show you, we have our name again. We also have the object color. This is where you can change the actual color of the object itself, not to be confused with the material color. You'll see that I just changed the color of the object to black. And since it has no material applied to it, when I deselect away from it, it just looks like a black blob, and you can barely see any shading happening, except in some very few instances where I get a bit of specularity. So, again, if I try to change the color to something else, then you're going to see the object as whatever color that is that I change it to. Likewise, if you go to wireframe, your lines will also be displayed. And you'll notice that since I have backface culling on, the lines in wireframe that are eclipsed by the silhouette of the object are not rendered. So if I go back to object properties and turn backface culling off, now I will be able to see through and see the lines on the back of my object as well. But once again, in wireframe, the lines of the object are displayed as the color of the object. That is true as well for wireframe shaded, when the object is not selected. When it is selected, the lines or the wireframe is displayed as white. So what I tend to do most of the time, or what I like to do when dealing with a single object, I like to change the object color to black, so that in wireframe I get some black lines, and then I like to go open my material editor and apply a standard gray blend material to it. And what that does is that gives me a nice shaded gray object with black lines or a black wireframe on it, which is to me nice and aesthetically pleasing. Something else I like to do is eventually I like to hide the grid, which you can do by just pressing G. And you can bring it back by pressing G as well. So I'm just going to hide my grid now. And I'm just going to get right into these edit poly stuff. So at the very top here, you'll see something called the modifier list. The modifier list is a very, very powerful tool. Actually, a list of numerous different types of tools that you can use to modify your polygonal object. There's too many of those right now for me to get into too much detail. So I won't really talk about those too much. There's one or two of them that I want to show you at the very end, but that's it. I'm not going to talk about too many of those. But that's where you can find them. You can also go and click this little button at the bottom to actually configure your modifier sets. So if there are certain ones that you find you're using all the time that you like a lot and you use almost every time you model, then you can configure that here. So how to do that is to click this button and choose Configure Modifier Sets. And then again you have your list here, and you can take them and drag them over and set up your buttons by grabbing one and dragging it over. And then when you're done dragging your modifiers to these various buttons, and you can also change how many buttons you have. You can set it to I tend to keep it around 8 or 10. And then when you're done setting your modifiers, you can just type your name that you want to save your set as and say save. Then, if you want to see those buttons, you can come over here and say choose which one you want. I'm going to choose Caleb_basic. And then you can say show buttons. And that's going to show your modifier buttons. So now if you want to apply your modifier to the object, you can just click the button and that'll automatically do it. So as you can see, I have a few here. I have one that's edit poly, which basically is just the same thing as going convert to editable poly, except it applies it as a modifier. There's turbo smooth, which basically subdivides the model, and you can just crank up the iterations, and that's used for subdivision modeling. I won't look at that into too much detail. Then there's symmetry, which I'm going to show you in a little more detail later. And then there's normal. And normal basically just flips the normals of the selected object, the face normals, and will invert them. So as you can see, if I go to object properties and turn back face culling on, you can now see that the cube itself, the face normals, are inverted. Control Z to undo, by the way, and Control Y to redo. And you can also find those up here under Edit, Undo and Redo. So the normal will flip the face normals of the selected object or of the selected faces. So say you only want to flip one polygon. You can select that face and then hit normal. And pardon me, that should... Okay. For some reason it's doing it to the entire object, not just to the selected faces. Okay, that's interesting. Alright, well I'll look at that later anyways, but as you can see it flips the polygonal normals. That's what it does. To delete a modifier once it's been applied, just simply right click and say delete. If you want to collapse its effect into the model and turn the model back to an editable poly, you can do two things. You can either right click and say convert to editable poly, which will collapse the modifier's properties into the model, or you can right click and say collapse to, and just click yes. That little dialog comes up and says, are you sure you want to do that? And just say yes, unless you don't want to, and then you say no. The last thing that I want to show you is that you can do a few things. Most modifiers, you can click this little plus sign to open them up, and they have like things that you can adjust underneath. Each of them are different. And you can also turn this little light bulb on and off to display the effect of the modifier on the model. Or you can hit this button here, which basically, while you're working on your model, when you move down the stack, it will still display the end result of the modifier, even though you're working below it on the editable poly. So that may be a little difficult to understand now, but you'll get used to that later, and it's very useful to be able to work on the editable poly, but still display the result of a modifier that's applied above it on the modifier stack. So I'm just going to delete that modifier now and get into the editable poly tools. So the first thing that we're going to want to look at is we're going to want to look at selection. So selection is basically how to select the various different sub-elements of your object. So polygonal objects are made up of essentially 3 types of selections, or 4 when you really get down to it. You have your vertices, which are displayed by little dots, and for some reason my vertices are not displaying. Hold on, let me try to customize my preferences here. Okay, yeah, there we go. So under object properties, you need to turn on vertex ticks, and then now you'll be able to individually see your vertices, which are displayed as blue dots. So if you go over here to selection, the first one is vertex mode, so you just click that button, and then you can select an individual vertex and drag it around in world space. So that's how you can select your vertices. Another thing that you can do is you can select multiple vertices by holding Control and then clicking on each of them. So now I've selected all 4 of them. Or you can marquee select a whole selection of vertices, and again you can just move them around. So again, if you marquee select one vert and hold Control and marquee select some others, then that will allow you to continue adding to your selection. And if you want to subtract for your selection, just hold Alt, and then you can click on a vertex to subtract it, or you can marquee select to subtract those from your selection as well. So that's vertex selection. Then we have edge selection. Now, so that's pretty straightforward. You can just click on and select edges. Likewise, you can marquee select numerous edges. Now, one tool that's very useful that goes hand in hand with selection is this little box over here called Ignore Backfacing. Now, what Ignore Backfacing does is that you'll notice that if I marquee select a group of these edges,